Well, good morning, everyone. We're getting close to lunchtime, so I'm hoping you've had enough biscuits to avoid your tummy rumbling too long for this next hour and a half talk. No, I joke. So I'm going to talk to you about vision-led transport solutions for active new housing development. Transport is key to delivering the mission for Homes England. So what we're about fundamentally is helping to deliver 300,000 homes per annum by the mid-2020s. That's the vision statement for the organisation. A vision-led approach will lead to better outcomes for the people living there, and better quality places. We're looking to challenge the status quo in the way that transport solutions for sites are developed and delivered, and in so doing help the outcomes, as I say, for the people living there. Homes England is the biggest developer of housing in the UK. It's a public sector government agency. And I work for a team that is about promoting design quality within the organisation and in connection with the projects that we are delivering. There's a real opportunity now, I believe, to reshape the way transport solutions are delivered for sites by taking a new approach and putting sustainable and active travel at the centre of solutions for sites that we're delivering. I think there's some interesting issues around there that might help to deliver that. One is to perhaps take the view that road delays are actually valuable because they act as an incentive for people to do things differently, to make different choices. We should be positively complementing and emphasising sustainable and active travel infrastructure in connection with housing. And we should be looking to evaluate solutions not in terms of delays for traffic, but more in terms of CO2 outcomes, the minimisation of CO2 and healthy and social indicators and healthy outcomes for people. So what's the problem with the current approach? Well, at the moment, transport evaluation for sites is largely based on taking existing patterns of traffic, projecting them forward, adding in the forecast levels of traffic on an empirical basis onto the road network, and hey presto, we often end up with having to deliver expensive road solutions to help deliver sites. And those road solutions can act as a delay because they're expensive, and we can have problems attracting the funding to deliver those road-based components. What are the change factors in play that might help us to change that perspective and that way of doing things? Well, we've got the climate change emergency, obviously. My son, who's 23, said to me recently, climate change is the big issue that his generation are thinking about. And his generation is the last generation where there's a chance to change the trajectory that the world is on in terms of sea level rises and all the catastrophe that could bring, etc. So there's the incentive to do something in a macro sense. Local authorities have often declared climate change emergencies, and so there's leverage there because we can say to local authorities, look, you've declared these emergencies, there's an onus on you to do things differently and to move away from highways and roads-based solutions towards a more integrated and balanced approach. We've had the COVID pandemic recently, obviously, and we've all probably changed the way we work, to work locally, to work at home, to avoid travelling in the peak hours, to use Teams, Zoom, or whatever it might be. There are real lessons there in the way that people can actually do things and work differently and avoid getting in their cars, and so that sites can work differently overall in a more sustainable and active travel basis. The risks of not doing that are that we're forever locked into this process of projecting traffic, adding it onto the network, being locked into the process of roads-based solutions for sites. So I'm promoting, with colleagues, a vision-led approach. It's not just one thing, it's a mosaic, it's a jigsaw of things that will work together to make sites work more effectively. A so-called triple access system, which has three fundamental planks to it. One is the transport initiatives themselves and promoting behaviour change, which was talked about recently, in the way people choose to use transport and the way people choose to use their sites and enjoy the places that they're living in. Secondly, it's about making sites more integrated together in a land use sense, so building in local living and working opportunities so that sites aren't just housing estates, but they have a local centre, local work hubs, mobility hubs. There's a great organisation called Como UK that can tell you a lot about those ideas. And thirdly, digital connectivity, fast internet, etc., smart places, making sure that people have the latest technology to enable them to enjoy and use their site and the places that they live differently. These approaches are happening now. So we are managing to change the conversation about the way transport solutions for sites are developed. There are a number of examples where we're doing this. At Long Marston Garden Village, for example, we've instituted a so-called vision and validate approach. At a Prince William of Barracks site in Grantham, we're changing the conversation the same way by getting our consultants to think about the vision for a site and backcast as to what the steps need to be to make that vision realised in a sustainable and active travel sense. We use a document called Building for a Healthy Life at the centre of the design process that we institute with our colleagues and with our consultants and with our partners, which sets out the design qualities that we're looking for. And central to that is, or an aspect of that document, is about sustainable transport and sustainable and active places, and making sure that places are inclusive for all. So I mentioned some of the sites just then, but also, for example, the A1 corridor. We've been looking at development in a broader sense around the A1 corridor in the Midlands, and we've been developing different forms of potential development that can be much more sustainable transport orientated, which is sort of encapsulated in these different generic models of the way places can be in the future. And as I said before, we're trying to change the conversation and we're trying to make sure that our consultants and the local authorities that we work with respond to this new way of thinking and deliver sites in a more sustainable way. The leverage that we have over this situation obviously often derives from three broad things. One is we as an organisation sometimes own the land, either through being given the land by government or by recycling funds and pulling land together. Secondly, there are government programme monies that we focus on these project situations and sites, and grant monies as well. So we have significant leverage to try and change the conversation in this way. And this approach can be regardless of geography. I've got to say that one of the issues that we've still got to wrestle with is the role of national highways, or formerly Highways England, who understandably have a roads programme to deliver, and I believe there's a bit of a change in culture needed within the DFT as to how they progress a transport appraisal, and in particular in relation to housing sites. But that change is happening. Active Travel England are coming forward as an organisation, and it will have a remit to require that sustainable solutions are delivered for sites in line with Local Transport Note 120, and they will be statutory consultee on all developments. And that organisation is founded from within, as I understand it, the Department for Transport. But I think there's a culture change needed in general to affect this change. Urgency, where is that coming from? Well, I mentioned the climate change emergency. That creates the impetus for change. We need to create a guiding coalition of people and stakeholders who have this agenda at their heart and who want to make things work differently for housing sites and for transport in general. Sustainable transport vision for sites should be at the heart of the development process. We should be start asking the question, how do we want sites to work in a sustainable sense from the start? And as I said before, backcasting and working out the steps as to how we get there. We need to create momentum for this sort of change. And I mentioned some of the projects that we are involved in. And this sort of event can create that momentum by you in the audience, talking to your colleagues, talking to stakeholders, talking to your consultants, to get people to change the conversation and do things differently towards a sustainable and an active travel outcome. So what are the outcomes from this vision-led approach? Well, the idea is to deliver more sustainable places that respond to climate change imperatives and deliver housing faster, make those housing sites viable because we avoid getting embroiled, arguably, in large-scale highways improvements, and deliver sites that are more integrated and of a better quality. I'd like to see the operationalisation of the triple access system. So in other words, when we're designing sites, yes, we think about the design of the site itself and the land use configuration of that site. We think about the transport interventions themselves and make sure that they're much more holistic in their nature and, as I say, not just about road solutions. And also, we deliver this digital connectivity idea for sites so that people can live and work locally. A change in emphasis in transport is needed. So what can you do to affect this change? Well, I think it's about trying to think differently. Ask questions of your colleagues and your stakeholders and people that you're working with. How can we deliver sites differently? How can they be different in the way that they work and in the way people choose to live in these places? How can we challenge, for example, parking standards so that when a house is built, the assumption is not necessarily that we'll have 1 or 2 parking spaces, but perhaps change parking towards a situation where, yes, parking is inevitably required, but it's priced differently, so people have to buy that parking space or rent it, and people have to think harder about whether to use a car in the context of the site that they are living in. Sounding like I'm anti-car. I'm not, because I realise everybody's got a car. I've got a car. We all probably in the room, most of us have got a car. It's about trying to encourage sustainable and active travel and a much more balanced approach to how sites work. Be excited about the possibilities that this approach can take. Be excited about what possibilities this approach can lead to, and be curious about what's involved. I've given you some pointers here as to what can be involved in this new approach, but ask questions yourself in the projects that you're involved in and see what response that gets in changing the way things are delivered. We at Homes England need your help. We want to understand what our stakeholders think of this issue. We want to understand how these approaches can be delivered effectively and made to work in practice, perhaps in the face of traditional approaches that, as I said before, are sort of numerically based in terms of forecasting traffic forward. So, in concluding then, I think there's a real opportunity to move towards a vision-based approach to planning sites. I think that will align with broader societal policy objectives. Arguably, it will make housing sites delivered faster and in a more equitable way, serving all sectors of the community and promoting active and sustainable travel. We need to realise that that new approach is potentially multifaceted and has different dimensions to it. But I think a concerted and strategic change is required in the way we do things to make that outcome, that sustainable and active travel outcome for sites and better quality sites, deliverable and delivered. So I think that's where I'd like to finish it, and I hope that's helped you to think about how the design of places relates to sustainable and active travel outcomes. Thank you.